Spring break, a time for sun, fun, and unforgettable memories. But not all memories are meant to be cherished. Some are better left buried, like the secrets of the Driftwood Motel, the shadows in the deep end, or the whispers from the cabin on the ridge. These are the stories they don't tell you, the ones that turn paradise into a nightmare. Welcome to 3 True Disturbing Spring Break Stories. Our first night there, we were sitting in the dingy common room laughing at urban legends we found online. It was Mia who stumbled on it. "Check this out," she said, her voice lowering like she was telling a campfire story. "The vanishing room. Supposedly there's a room 6 at this very motel, but anyone who stays there disappears. Lucky for us, we're in room 7, I joked, but Caleb's eyes lit up. "We should check it out," he said, already on his feet. Caleb was always the one looking for trouble, or, as he'd call it, adventure. The hallway was darker than I remembered, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. As we walked, something strange happened. The room numbers didn't make sense. There was room 5, then room 7, no room 6. "That's weird," I muttered, but Caleb laughed. "Told you it doesn't exist," he said, knocking on the blank stretch of wall where room 6 should have been. "Hey, ghosts, anyone home?" That's when we heard it, a sound like nails scraping against wood. It was faint, but it made my stomach flip. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered, clutching Josh's arm. "Probably rats," Josh said, but even he didn't sound convinced. The scraping grew louder. Then the wall opened. It didn't swing or slide. It just cracked apart, revealing the door to room 6. My heart pounded as Caleb grinned like he'd won the lottery. "Don't go in there," I said, my voice trembling. But Caleb stepped inside without a second thought. The room was suffocatingly damp. The air smelled of rot, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper stained with something dark. In the center of the room was an old, rusted bed. On the nightstand sat an analog clock. Its hands were spinning backward. "We shouldn't be here," Mia muttered, backing away. I was about to follow her when the door slammed shut behind Caleb. "Caleb!" I screamed, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, I could hear him laughing at first. Then came the gasping, choking sounds. I pressed my face to the grimy window, and what I saw will haunt me forever. Caleb was there, but his body was wrong, twisted. His limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. His face was frozen in a wide, unnatural grin like a marionette. The light in the room flickered, then went out. When it came back on, the room was empty. "Caleb!" I screamed, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, I could hear him laughing at first. Then came the gasping, choking sounds. I pressed my face to the grimy window, and what I saw will haunt me forever. No Caleb, no bed, no clock, just a bare, gray cube. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the car. But as I fumbled with the keys, my phone buzzed. It was a notification, a photo. It was a selfie of us, all 4 of us laughing on room 6. But something was off. In the corner of the photo by the bed, Caleb's shadow loomed. His grin was still impossibly wide, and beneath it, a new message appeared. "Your reservation is confirmed." I took the job at the pool to escape. Spring break was supposed to be a time to unwind, but instead I wanted solitude. The graveyard shift promised that, just me, an empty building, and the sound of water. No distractions, no one to bother me. It felt perfect. The first night was uneventful. The lights buzzed faintly above and the pool sat still and quiet, its surface like glass. I walked the perimeter, scanning every corner of the facility, finding nothing but shadows. By the time the sun rose, I was convinced I'd made the right choice. But the second night, I started to notice things. It began with a puddle near the pool's edge. It shouldn't have been there. No one else was supposed to be in the building. The water in the puddle rippled slightly, as if disturbed. I told myself it was a leaky pipe or condensation, anything but what my gut whispered. As I stared at the ripples, I heard a faint splash behind me. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, my flashlight scanning the water, but the pool was empty. Still, the sound lingered in my ears, like a phantom echo. It was harder to shake the unease as the hours dragged on. The building felt heavier, like I wasn't alone. By the third night, I was on edge before I even stepped inside. The air felt colder than it should have, and the shadows seemed to stretch further into the corners. As I made my rounds, I heard it again. A splash, louder this time, like someone diving into the deep end. I sprinted to the pool, heart pounding, but the water was still, perfectly still. No ripples, no signs of movement. And then I saw it, small drops of water leading away from the pool, like footsteps. They led to the locker rooms. I should have left right then and there. But something compelled me forward. Morbid curiosity, maybe, or a need to prove it was nothing. The lights in the locker room flickered weakly as I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the damp tile floors. And then I heard it. Breathing. It was faint, barely audible, but it wasn't mine. My chest tightened as I followed the sound to the farthest row of lockers. There, the breathing stopped. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand. The door of the locker in front of me creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a sharp noise rang out from the pool area. A loud splash followed by the unmistakable sound of water cascading onto the floor. I spun around and ran back, my legs shaking. The puddle was back. Only this time, it wasn't a puddle. It was a trail. The water led directly to the lifeguard chair. I followed it cautiously, my shoes squeaking on the wet tile. As I reached the chair, my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. And that's when I felt it. Cold, wet fingers brushed against my arm, and I heard the faintest whisper. "Join me." I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. Blindly, I bolted toward the nearest exit, arms outstretched, feet slipping on the wet tiles. I didn't stop until I hit the heavy metal door, shoving it open with every ounce of strength I had. The cold night air hit me like a wave, and I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. When I looked back at the building, I half expected to see someone emerging from the shadows, but all I saw was the faint ripple of water through the glass windows. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the building, but eventually, I forced myself to stand and walk away. I never went back. I don't know what I saw or felt in that pool. Sometimes I convince myself it was just my imagination, the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. But late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can still hear it. The soft drip, drip, drip of water. I've stopped going near water entirely. I'll never know what was waiting for me in the deep end, and I never want to. Spring break wasn't supposed to be like this. My friends and I had planned for beaches, bonfires, and bad decisions. Instead, we ended up in a remote cabin in the woods, miles from the nearest town, because Josh swore it would be an adventure. The first few days were fine. We hiked, played card games, and laughed about how disconnected we were from the world. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us in the trees. But by the third night, the novelty had worn off. It started with the smell. I noticed it first, a faint, sickly sweet odor that seemed to drift in through the cracks in the cabin walls. At first I thought it was just the forest, maybe something rotting nearby. But the smell grew stronger, more pungent, until it was impossible to ignore. "Do you smell that?" I asked, but the others just shrugged. "Probably a dead animal," Mia said, wrinkling her nose. But the smell didn't go away. By the fourth night, it was unbearable. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy with the stench of decay. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something decomposing just outside, its putrid scent seeping in. That's when we found the stains. Josh was the one who noticed them first. Dark, reddish-brown smears on the cabin floor leading from the front door to the back. They looked old, dried, but there was something about them that made my stomach churn. "Probably rust," Josh said, though his voice wavered. We decided to stay inside that night, locking all the doors and windows, but the smell grew worse, almost suffocating. And then we heard it. A faint, wet sound. It was subtle at first, like the squelch of something heavy being dragged across the ground. It came from outside, circling the cabin. "What is that?" Mia whispered, clutching Josh's arm. We huddled together in the center of the room, clutching flashlights and whatever we could use as weapons. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the door. And then it stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then came the knock. It wasn't a normal knock. It was slow, deliberate, and wet, like something heavy and sodden striking the wood. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The knock came again, louder this time. Josh stood, his face pale. "I'm going to check," he said, his voice trembling. "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't." But he shook me off and crept toward the door. He peered through the peephole, his breath fogging the glass. "What do you see?" Mia whispered. Josh didn't answer. "Josh?" I said, my voice shaking. Slowly, he turned to face us. His eyes were wide, his face ashen. "There's nothing there," he said, but his voice was hollow, distant. The smell grew stronger, almost unbearable. And then, from the back of the cabin, we heard the wet, dragging sound again. We didn't wait to find out what it was. We grabbed our things and ran, leaving the cabin and the car behind. As we stumbled down the dirt road, the smell began to fade, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I glanced back once, and in the distance I thought I saw something. A dark, shapeless figure dragging itself across the ground. I haven't spoken to my friends since that trip. I don't know if they saw it too or if they've managed to forget, but I can't. Sometimes, late at night, I wake to the faint sound of something wet dragging across the floor, and I know it's still out there, waiting.